Hello everybody, my name is Swaggy and let's talk about nostalgia support. You remember these guys, right? Chronojet Dragon and Gleaming Lord Uranus. These are the official mascots, kind of the G era and V era respectively. I guess the V's era is Mordred Phantom, but this is for the Shinemon arc. These two icon decks are going to release in the new DZSS16, the Legendary Vanguards, and because these decks are not only kind of cool, they're also, older decks reimagined into the D standard format, I thought it'd be good to give you guys a primer on the decks here, both the Chronojet icon and the Shinemon icon. Just because I think maybe returning players might like them, or people who are a bit newer to the game might see these two decks have some weird mechanics and just want to know what they do and how they can build them or play around them, that kind of thing. So this video is going to be kind of a primer on the decks. It's not going to be super comprehensive and give you all the nitty gritty, but I am going to give you some of the basic board plans the decks want to do, some deck lists, and just go over the cards in general. So, to start, we need to talk about the fact that these are icon decks. For the uninitiated, you may be wondering, what are icon decks? Icon decks are essentially a clan/archetype linked by the icon you can see in the center of the screen right now that I've kind of magnified for you, releasing this year as a part of Vanguard's 15th anniversary. While the Aichi and Kai icon decks releasing later this month for EN players and already out for JP players came in a trial deck, the ones in this video are coming from a pack, again known as the Legendary Vanguards, DZSS16. The icon decks are respectively of Chrono Shindo's Chronojet Dragon, and Shinemon Nita and his Uranus and Valkyrion. If you haven't played in a bit, this is a great chance to come back in with a deck that you are familiar with. And if you are maybe a seasoned player or a completely new player, both these decks are really interesting and I think have a lot of room to kind of build and explore. So you can find a build that works for you, and hopefully you think these are fun enough to pick up. And overall, I think this video should give you a pretty good understanding of what some of the strengths and weaknesses of these decks are. So to start, let's talk about the Chrono Icon deck. The Chrono Icon deck focuses on the Chronojet Dragon and the Stride mechanic. If you're in your 20s like me and you played when you were younger, you'll remember Stride. Basically, you can discard a grade 3 when you are already grade 3 to get to a card in your extra deck known as the G-Zone. This mechanic is already kind of in standard, but this is kind of Chronojet's bread and butter here. So we're going to go over that in detail. The G units in question are going to be Chrono Dragon Next Stage on the left and Mystery Flare Dragon on the right. So if the question is, are G units back too? The answer is yes. To start, let's go over the main Vanguard, Chronojet Dragon. To note, there are two Chronojet Dragons with the same name in standard. The Chronojet Dragon from G era, who is also a standard boss, and this new one with the Chrono icon in the bottom. So if you are planning to buy this deck, piece by piece, make sure you buy the correct Chronojet. The icon Chronojet has these like weird red markings on his face and eyeballs and the icon in the bottom, and also has 13,000 power, and this deck is very separate from the original Chronojet stuff. They basically don't really play well together at all, so make sure you pick up the correct ones. So going over some of the effects, when you stride, which again is done when you and your opponent are grade 3, you can send one rearguard your opponent controls to the bottom of the deck, which is a very powerful removal spell basically because, not being in the drop zone or the soul or in the hand basically means it's gone. Or if they played around it by not putting rearguards on board, you get to draw a card. Pretty good. Depending on the number of G-Zone cards flipped face up, your front row will gain power basically at the end of your turn. Depending on the number of G-Zone cards flipped face up, your front row gains power. At the end of your turn, G units go back to the G-Zone face up. So this is how your board's going to gain some power later on. Jet can also restrict your opponent's guard in his own attack and gains power equal to the number of bound Chronojets in play, of which this deck has ways to get Chronojets bound, that you need to get them bound, so Jet's power will keep rising. You have to kind of remember that this power and guard restrict, it's not present while you are in your stride form. If you are Chrono Dragon Next Stage on the Vanguard Circle, then you don't get these effects. But don't worry, you do have ways to leverage this power later on. And that main way comes with Chrono Dragon Next Stage. You can only stride this card if you have the Chrono icon, so you have to run that Jet. And after this card attacks, you get to put it back to the G-Zone face up during the battle phase and bring back Chronojet Dragon to your Vanguard Circle. This leaves you with Chronojet Dragon as your Vanguard once again to leverage the power bonus. Next stage will originally reduce the drive of the Chronojet to 0, but if you bind the Chronojet as per the cost, it will gain drive back. And late game, it will get 2 drives again. This is pretty good. This is kind of going to be your first stride, your second stride. This is going to be the way that you kind of pummel your way through your opponent. Having basically 4 drives and 5 drives is really strong. You can check a ton of triggers and you're just going to break through a bunch of guard with Chronojet Dragon's ability to, deny guarding. Just keep in mind that you need to flip up the same next stage in your G-Zone face up so that you can pay his cost. Basically meaning you only get to stride him like twice. You can't use him like 3 different times. It's just, you don't have the cost to pay for that. I mean, you can, but you just, then 2 of them don't do anything. The other stride in question is Mystery Flare Dragon. This is the first stride that Gear Chronicle got in the trial deck originally, and has been revamped for the modern era. By flipping over a card in the G zone, he's going to give you a rear guard multi-attack and front row power that will also carry over to your opponent's turn. This means on your opponent's turn, Chronojet Dragon, your Vanguard, has 18,000 power, making it a lot easier to guard attacks. Additionally, if you strode enough times and you have enough cards face up in your G zone, you can get an extra turn for the steep cost of 4 cards from your hand with different grades. That payoff is crazy, but also takes a lot of setup. In this extra turn, once again your Vanguard will be Chronojet Dragon, so you can enjoy the power bonuses that he gives your front row and finish your opponent off. Now let's talk about the right line. In both cases, you need to use the Icon right line grade 0 so that you can use the skill of your grade 1, I believe. This is Chronodren. He's super cute. When rolled upon, if you went second, draw 1. Both starters have the same effect. But yeah, you have to use the Icon ones. First up is the grade 1 Mazer Gear Dragon. He lets you dig deeper into your deck by drawing 2 cards and sending 1 back to the deck. This helps you fix your hand and gets to the early game pieces that you'll need to survive to get to your stride. In the drop zone as well, basically once per game, because this has to be a right deck Mazer Gear that does this, he can turn any unit on your board to something that is 1 grade higher, letting you toolbox out some of the stronger cards in your deck. And the grade 2 right line, Smoke Gear Dragon, lets you find any grade 3 card in your deck and put it into your hand, so you can pay the cost of your first stride or your Chronojets to fuel the cost of next stage. Basically, you're never going to miss stride with this deck, and you're going to be able to keep your defenses up so you can get to striding. As for in-archetype Veers, and one of the grade 3s that you can search is Bali. He has 10,000 shield despite being a grade 3, so you don't just necessarily lose a bunch of defenses by playing a bunch of grade 3s in your deck. But he also gains 10,000 power on attack, and if he is the cost of stride, and you don't already have one of him on the board, he comes back with grade -2. Why does that matter? Well, it matters for stuff like the Mazer Gear to spin it back for a grade 2, or some of the other strides you could use from or some of the older strides that let you spin one of your units back to the deck and then bring out a grade 2. Those aren't ideal to stride, but you can do it. But your main combo piece with that is Mazer Gear, or just having a 23,000 beater on board, which is very useful in this deck. As for grade 2s, we have Steam Fighter Amber, who is okay. On place, you can counterblast 1 and draw a card, and he gains 5k if your Vanguard is grade 3. And Generation Break 1, which basically means you have a G unit face up in your G zone or on your Vanguard circle. If your Vanguard is the Chrono icon, which it normally does, this will gain 5/5. This card's okay. It can add to your defenses. It's something to do a bit early game to draw a card, but it's nothing really super special, but he's okay. But the real prize of the grade 2s is Upstream Dragon. This is probably going to be the card you really want to use a Mazer Gear spin to get a grade 1 out of the game back into Upstream Dragon. He's very important. He has this combined rusher effect. Basically, when your grade 3 or greater Vanguard with Chrono Icon is placed, you can come back from the drop zone by paying either cost. Basically, you always have resources to pay, so you can always get back a unit on board. On attack, again, if you have the Chrono Icon, you can gain 5k, and if you do at the end of the battle, put it at the bottom of the deck, and then call a grade 1, and you call it to a back row rear guard circle. Or, if it's the first battle of the turn, and your Vanguard is exactly grade 3, you can call it to the front row instead. In most situations, basically, this means it will go to the back row, but if you are grade 3 exactly, meaning you kind of went first and can't stride, or it's the extra turn with Mystery Flare Dragon, you can get a 4th attack with Upstream Dragon. This is going to be your plan if you go first, right? This is going to be the only way you kind of get a bit more oomph on those turns. It's nothing ideal, but it is something to work off. This card is very good. And for grade 1s, we have Steam Skara Gigi, who when placed on Rearguard Circle, if you have a grade 3 Chrono Icon, gains 5k. And at the end of the battle, it attacks or boosts if you have the Chrono Icon and you have stroked this turn. Move it to the soul and draw a card. This is your ideal call for Upstream Dragon, which converts Upstream Dragon into a Skara, which converts into a draw. Because it gains 5k, it also makes a pretty large column with something like Ballyhoo, so you get the biggest number possible and then you draw. There is also Steam Breath Dragon, which can be discarded as any grade for 2 scenarios in this deck. One is striding, meaning a grade 3 substitute if you run out, and the other being Mystery Flare Dragon's cost, so he can be one of the grades you don't have. And on place, can counterblast 1 to check top 7 to find a grade 3, and if you don't, you get to compensate by countercharging 1 again, so you basically pay nothing. And he's also a 13k attacker. So that's all the cards do. You may notice that a lot of them kind of have a power ceiling, I would say. They cap at about plus 5k, Amber gets plus 10 on 1 turn, and Bali gains 10 always. But most of these cards are a little smaller, and you were kind of meant to supplement them with Chronojet's Vanguard skill once you get out of next stage or during your Mystery Flare turns, or using Mystery Flare's power skill at all to gain 5k to your front row. And then, Chronojet Dragon the next turn during your turn skip gets you a bit more power there. With that, let's look at what a deck like this could look like. I have provided, I think, 2 lists for both decks. One, I'm going to focus on like really icon heavy stuff. I'll go over some of the generic pieces later on that you see in this list if you're not familiar with them. But for now, this is kind of what the deck is going to look like if you are really speccing heavily into the icon cards, whether it's a cost reason or because you just, want to play the icon cards. We're on 4 of basically everything. For our Regalius piece, you get 1 Regalius piece per deck. We are on Union the Sky, which can EB3 or CD1 on discard and draw 1. Or, when your Vanguard is attacked, you can EB3 or CD1 and it gains 15,000 power. Or if you bind 1 unit in your drop zone with the same name as your Vanguard, it's a 25,000 point shield. This is really useful in this deck because it's the only way to get the 3rd jet bound out of game. This maximizes next stage's power. We're on to Nocturzio as well in order to cycle for the draw. 3 of the Steam Fighter that gives a bunch of shield. The 1-off Ace unit lets you build boards early game and gives you something to do early game. And in our G zone, in addition to the Chrono Icon Strides, we also have 1 set of Fate Rider Dragons, because Fate Rider Dragon is like the best possible thing you can really stride aside from the other 2. The competition is not stiff, mind you. Cronus Command is not particularly good in this deck, but Fate Rider at least helps you stop things like decking out, can work well spinning some cards on your board. I think I said earlier on that it works with Bali, but I think Bali needs the Chrono Icon to proc its effect. I just don't have it on hand right now. This stops kind of deck out. It gives you a bit more oomph in your final few turns if you're thinking about the deck out. So yeah, that is the icon heavy list. This second one is more generic focused. I've taken this from Twitter user Song E Stuff. And basically, it's really focused on using a bunch of discard fodder from the 3 of Lemina to the 3 of Discard, so that you can alleviate the discard for right cost to maintain the hand advantage, so that you can safely get to later stages of the game, and then you can stride safely, not being at too high of damage because every card in your hand converts to another card on discard for ride, so you will have a pretty beefy hand. The first list I just showed you is pretty heavy on like maintaining some board presence. This one isn't for the early game. But both lists are pretty good. These are like fine decks. Now we can talk about some of the generic cards I didn't really go into detail. So Lemina on the left, Nocturzio in the center, and Tiscar all the way on the right. These are cards that are really useful to discard. Nocturzio is the only one that works during stride step as well as right step. And Lemina and Tiscar both only work during the right phase. The right step, I guess. But the main gist of these cards is when you discard them, you'll get a card back. And that's very useful in digging for your jets, in just making sure you have hand size to keep up. These are really good cards. I would consider running a few of them. I've only put Nocturzio into the generic list because I think he's a bit more readily available. He got reprinted in DZBTO6, so he might be easier to find. These are some of the newer generic cards that you could consider running. All Crushing Revolution Colossus is seen in the Song E list. And it's not bad. It has the same kind of skill as Steam Fighter Ambra, which is on place CB1, draw 1, give 5k. But also, if you guard with him, you can EB3 and gain 5k per grade of a card in your bind zone, of which you are going to have Chronojet Dragons there. So you can give up some power for some shield. And also, if you put him back into the deck for the effect of something like Mazer Gear, your Vanguard is going to have CB-1, which is very useful for stuff like next stage getting damage denied, for example. Speaking of cards that help with damage denied, Primordial Heartblaze. This is in the Regalius piece slot. I think Union the Sky is a little better, but this card is fine too. When you would discard cards for the cost of stride, you can instead use it from the drop zone. And basically, you don't need to discard a card at all, which is great. And then you get the CC1, basically. You get the flip 1 card in your damage zone face up, which is very helpful. I just think the slot, the opportunity cost of not playing something like Twin Cast or Union is pretty bad. But if you think you're fine on the defensive side, this is a really good aggressive piece. He lets you get a lot of value out of it. Then you have the 2 new dual clans. I think they're just okay. I just put them here because they're the Dark States dual clans. The first one is like CB1, you can call the card back from your drop zone that's grade 2 or lower after checking the top card and either, I believe, milling it or putting it to the bottom. Or you can EB2 and move a card from your opponent's board into the soul, basically. These are fine. The CB1 skill is a bit more useful because you want to get some of the Chrono Icon units back into rotation. And on attack, it will gain 5,000 power if your opponent is grade 2 in this deck. The 2 roommates on the all the way far right. You can CB1 and put a card from your damage zone back to your hand and then put a card from your deck face down as damage. So you can retrieve some important pieces. Or you can EB3, look top 5 and add a grade 3 card that isn't a Regalius piece. So your stride fodders and whatnot. These are some older cards you could consider. Gear Parrot, I believe, has some utility in these decks. I don't think it's the most ideal piece, but it's fine. It helps you recycle some of the normal units in your drop zone or your bind zone. And this can be kind of useful because a lot of the Chrono Icon cards are one and dones, and sometimes you'll just run out of grade 1s at the call of upstream, and that's where the Gear Parrots come in. Steam Fighter Argandia can get a lot of the weird stuff out of your soul, so you can have a big shielder, but also, get things out of your Soul. Soul Blast 1 is basically not a real cost with Gigi in the game. You just want to put him on the guard circle, Soul Blast the Gigi out, and then with Gear Parrot, you could put it back to the deck, for example. But yeah, you just want to use the soul you have anyways, which the deck doesn't really give you a good outlet for. This is going to be the kind of basic game plans. So you're going to try and survive until turn 3, going second. And this is what your front row is going to look like at the start of your main phase. It's going to be Upstream Dragon, next stage, Bali. You can discard Bali for right and he comes back. And then if Upstream has already been discarded for right, he can come back again. Or if you played him early game, he can come back after you intercept with him or something. And I'm just imagining you don't have back row units, for example. This is what the board looks like. After next stage attacks, you can bring Chronojet Dragon back to the board. He's going to give 5k to your front row, then 5k to himself if you bind one jet from your drop zone with next stage's skill. This makes him a 23,000 attacker. Upstream Dragon then will swing for 20,000 because he has 5k from his own skill and 5k from jet, who will then go to the bottom of the deck and bring out GG to boost Bali. Bali himself is going to be 28,000 based on 10 from his own skill, 5 from jet, and then 5 from GG. Your second turn will also look pretty similar to this, just the numbers will be bigger. This is kind of your board plan for if you get right skipped or you're forced to go first. The other rear guard that's not the Colossus can be Steamfighter Amber for the biggest number possible, but this is what it's going to look like. 15 from Upstream goes first, then you call GG from the deck, and GG is a 13k attacker, and then you go Jet, then GG, then the Colossus. These are kind of small. Obviously, you probably want a booster or something. I'm just imagining you don't have one. And GG won't even draw you the card here, but she is pretty useful for doing this. You can call Steam Rev Dragon as well, but I find Steam Rev Dragon is a lot more useful in your hand to call or to use as the Mystery Flare Strife Order. But yeah, as you can tell, this is not really a very good turn 3. So ideally, you don't get into this position. Ideally, you are always on that first board state rather than this one, because this is a little bit slow, a little bit puny. Now, this is what the Mystery Flare Dragon finisher turn looks like. Basically, by flipping a card face up in your G-Zone with Mystery Flare Dragon skill, you're going to give 5k to front row, and then after that, Bali is going to attack again. So, Bali is going to be the one to restand. You got 28 from Bali, 33 from your Vanguard. Bali restands. Upstream doesn't gain the 5 because we want to keep Upstream on board. Because if you use Upstream's skill to gain 5, he has to go to the bottom of the deck. So if Gigi is placed on this turn, then you can make a 28 column there as well. Then the turn skips and you get to this board state with Jet as the Vanguard. In this scenario, for the first battle of the turn, Upstream will attack with the 5k from Mystery Flare Dragon, plus 10k from Chronojet Dragon, plus 5k from his own skill. Upstream is a big guy who then goes back to the deck and calls out Gigi, who will gain a bunch of power as well, thanks to Chronojet skill, from her skill, and from Mystery Flare. Thus ending off with 38, 38, 36. This is really powerful stuff. Honestly, one of the crazier kill turns ever. This is, I believe, 8 attacks in a row. If your opponent lives through 8 attacks in a row, you've done something very, very wrong. But of course, it's kind of hard to set this up, and it will take a while to get here. But once you do get here, you should win. Hopefully. Now that that's done, let's look at the pros and cons of the deck. So because of how Chronojet works in the way he has a lot of drive checking, the potential for game-ending triggers is very high, especially in conjunction with Jet's Guard Restrict. Deck a crit or something and you put it on Jet, it's going to be very difficult for your opponent to come back from it, especially because they're probably not going to be able to guard it. If it's swinging at such big numbers and they can't use stuff like PGs from their hand, it's going to be rough. Again, the extra turn, 8 attacks in a row essentially, very high kill threat. Something to really worry about. The free spin on Jet I find very good. I think spinning is probably the strongest form of removal in this game. It's really hard to get a unit back at the bottom of the deck. If they only have one of something, then it becomes a real hassle to get it back, rather than just putting it to drop zone. And finally, the deck is actually kind of tanky with Mystery Flare Dragon's power skill and a lot of ways to accumulate card advantage. So that is nice, because strike decks take a while to get going. You want to be able to tank a lot of the early turns, and I think this deck can do that. As for the cons, if the triggers are whiffed, you cannot kill your opponent. The numbers are kind of small without them, and you don't really have innate pressure outside of them, so you really have to check those yellows. It's also really easy to deck out with this deck, I find. You're drive checking a lot, you're drawing a lot, and you just can end up in a position where you just don't have cards in your deck left. So you need to be very cautious about how much you drive check. Mystery Flare Dragon's turn skip may not be feasible every turn 5. Sometimes you just don't have the grades for it. And if that's the case and you just strike Mystery Flare on 5, it's not amazing. Finally, strike decks have very easy counterplay and readily accessible checks. What I mean by that is your opponent can just win the die roll and go second, and they know you have a G zone, so they're just gonna go second and great lock you, for example. And again, going first is kind of irritating, even though upstream dragon helps a bit. Your numbers are still kind of small, and you don't get a lot of advantage going first on turn 3. Overall, if you want to play Chronojet Dragon, I think it is a little bit better than the Strike Crest version. And if you're missing kind of the G-era stuff, this is a pretty fun way to get back into Chronojet. He's aggressive, he's got a huge sack chance, which really makes you feel like Chrono Shindo. And the Mystery Flare turn skip is just such a hype moment, it's so fun to do. So it's not perfect, as you can probably see from the screen, but it's decent, and I do recommend it for fans of the G-era who want to relive Gear Chronicle. Before the video continues, I just want to advertise, I do have a Ko-Fi. I'm not going to paywall any content, obviously I don't really have a lot to paywall, but if you'd like to support the channel, and what I do, and you want to see me, maybe try to upload a bit more regularly, maybe improve this microphone of mine, then any help would be appreciated. You don't have to donate, just want to put it out there in case you do want to support the channel and what I do. Okay, back to the video. Okay, now let's talk about the other icon deck in this set, Shinemon's Gleaming Lord Uranus. If you're unfamiliar, in the V-Series Vanguard's first reboot, there was an arc dedicated to the secret history of Shinemon Nita, the owner of Card Capital, in which he played the Genesis deck focused around the archetype of Astral Poets. In their original inception, you were meant to stack the V-Series' force markers in order to call the boss Valkyrion. He has 70,000 power, and if you read the skill, you can get a multi-drive, going anywhere from 1 drive to 5. And in this icon variant, you can relive that quintuple drive experience. Although, these force markers don't exist anymore, so your Vanguard is not going to get a ton of power. This standard variant instead focuses on creating astral plane gauges, and with the 5 stacked, Valkyrion will then gain the ability to do the multi-drive. So, how does the deck get there? Well, first, let's look at Gleaming Lord Uranus, the deck's main grade 3. You will be stacking 1 gauge a turn and superior call a unit back from your drop. The unit you call back can be something like Valkyrion. And when you've hit 3 gauges, your front row will gain 5,000 power. Now, you need to keep this in mind. Your back row becoming an astral plane is essential because that is not only where you call Valkyrion, but also where nothing else can be called. This means if you're playing powerful cards that work on boost like, I don't know, Dissection Angel or something, you're going to want to get rid of them early before the plane gets set up, or you're just going to lose a rear guard for nothing. Anything placed on the astral plane must then go to the drop zone, except for Valkyrion. Okay, before I go into who this Valkyrion is in this series, let me explain the astral plane, because it can be a little bit, not weird, but just I want to go through it. As mentioned, only astral deities can reside on the astral plane, meaning only Valkyrion can be in your back row center the moment you hit grade 3. On this marker, the astral deity can perform drive checks and attack. Now, it is important to note that every unit in Vanguard, when given the ability to drive check, has the base drive of 1. Valkyrion can attack from the astral plane even if he doesn't do the top 5 check. Thus, in those attacks, you always have 1 drive check. And in those drive checks, everything you check in Valkyrion's attack goes straight to the soul, so you don't get to generate insane hand advantage of Valkyrion's drives. But it does at least fuel your soul for future skills. Finally, once the turn is over, you'll have to move Valkyrion to the bottom of the deck, so you'll need to find a way to get kind of an endless conga line of Valkyrions in rotation. With that, I keep talking about him, let's show him on the screen now. This is Valkyrion, the only astral deity. At 70,000 power and a base grade of 5, he's huge. To get him to the back row center, you can ignore the grade restrictions, so you can just call him from your hand or from the drop with Shinemon's skill. And when you mill him, then, when he's placed, if you have 5 or more astral plane gauges, you look at the top 5 cards of your deck, discard 1, and if it was a Keter Sanctuary card, of which Valkyrion is one by virtue of being a Kree Elemental, which is every nation, this unit's drive becomes the same as the discarded card's grade until the end of the turn, meaning you can get up to 5 drives if you mill 1 Valkyrion. Now, keep this in mind, you must discard a card if you can, meaning if in the top 5 you see 5 Keter Sanctuary triggers, you must discard 1 and your drive will become 0. The only feasible way to kind of avoid this is to run something like Bang Dream triggers. Is it a likely scenario that will happen? Not often, but can it happen? Yeah. In the scenario that you open 5 Bang Dream triggers, you have to still discard 1, but because you didn't discard a Keter Sanctuary unit, your drive will stay at 1. Another thing to note, Sephirogila, Grifogila, Grifogila Vartex. These may seem like you can get 11 drives with Valkyrion. No, you cannot. These are not Kree Elementals, they are nationless, I believe is what they're called. And the difference between the two is that a Crate Elemental is every nation, a nationless unit is none of them. Therefore, it is not a Keter Sanctuary card, so you do not get the drive. A lot of weird rulings aside, the main gist is that this guy is a 70k attacker who gets quintuple drive, but only when you have 5 gauges. So how do you get 5? Well, Uranus will get you 1 gauge, so how do we get 5, right? Are we going to wait till turn 8 to have 5? We must have other supporting units, right? And we do. Though I say the word units, plural, as the barest definition of the word, we have 2. That's the plural, we have 2. Before we get into that, we have to talk about the right line. So this is your grade 1. Sorry, this is your grade 0. And this is your grade 1, Atlas of Heavenly Sphere, who will let you have the Astral Plane gauges and will only let you write Shinemon cards. And when you write out the grade 2, he becomes an Astral Plane gauge. So this is 1. On the grade 2 right line, once you write up the Shinemon, you can look at the top 3, put 1 to hand, 1 to soul, and 1 to the bottom of the deck. This is really important because you want to dig for the next piece of the Astral Gauge puzzle, which is this guy. Quaking Heavenly Dragon, Astraios Dragon. Now, if you ride him on Uranus or vice versa, you gain Persona Ride. That's fine, but you don't really want to ride him, because every time you place him on the Rearguard Circle or the Vanguard Circle, you're going to get a gauge. But only once per turn can you use this guy's skill, basically. Then if you're at 4 gauges, you can draw 1 card. He also gets a little bit stronger every time Valkyrion drive checks, basically. When you move something from the soul from that drive check, he gets 2000 power. So if he gets 5 drives, he gets plus 10. If he gets 1, he's plus 2, putting him at 15. And at the end of the turn, when the Valkyrion leaves, you can move in the soul and draw a card. The astute among you may realize that you have to use the grade 1 right line, the Uranus Vanguard, and Astraios to get 3 on turn 3 for the plus 5000 that Uranus gives. Then, if you use Uranus' skill on 4 and Astraios on 4, remember that Uranus only works on the Vanguard Circle, so you can't Persona Ride this and have to call Uranus later. Only then will you get 5 gauges to get Valkyrion's multi-drive ability. So, this card is really important because the only way you can get to your thresholds for the Astral Plane gauges is by finding this guy by turn 3. You have to. Otherwise, you're just going to be quite a bit behind. But thanks to some of the support cards, we can find him no problem, such as Phosphorus of Auspicious Light. When placed on the Rearguard Circle from hand, if you're a Shinemon Vanguard, EB3, check the top 7 and put 1 grade 3 or greater Shinemon card to your hand. Grade 3 or greater means Astraios, Uranus, and Valkyrion. And when he attacks, he's a 15k. He's a little bit slow though. He only gains the 5k if your opponent is also grade 3, basically kind of just breaking even barely into a 13k base. This is likely done because, well, I'll explain it later, but you'll see that a lot of the Shinemon cards don't have a lot of power in it. They are all a little bit small, much smaller than the Chrono one. The other searcher in the deck is Deputized Bear, who on place can look top 7 and put 1 Shinemon to your hand, but if you do so, you must put a card from your hand to the soul. So you don't go plus technically, you just get to dig a little bit more. And you can't add the Sentinels to your hand. Like both Icon decks have their own specific Sentinel. This can't search that. He's okay, but I mean, not going plus is a bit rough. The other great one the deck got is Estraya, who in the drop zone, when your Vanguard uses its skill to call a unit back, can come along as well for CB1 if you don't have another card of the same name. And she converts your soul into bouncing her back to the hand. Why do you want to bounce her? Because she's a 15k shield. This is important because A, it gives you an outlet for your soul, and B, your deck is really going to need more shield. You can see that she works even really early game, so don't be afraid to use her to guard like a 15 for no pass in your center. With all that, this is what one of the lists could look like. Again, I've made an icon-focused one, where I imagine this is the one that's a little bit cheaper, a little bit easier to pick up. We're using all the icon cards at max out quantities. One Ririlim, I believe is her name. She's at 1 right now for all decks, but on place you can CB1 draw 1, CB1 Soul Blast 1 to draw 1, then call the card from your hand, and afterwards, after she boosts, you can move a whole column, including her, to the soul, and then you can get a Genesis from your drop zone, of which your whole deck is Genesis. Painkiller Angel is here, not because I think she's particularly incredible, but you just need to wait to dig, and this is a really cheap way to do it because Painkiller Angel lost a lot of value once Dissection Angel came out. And we're on one Ace unit who can top 7 and call 1, which is good for finding Uranus, good for finding Astraios Dragon. And the Regalis piece is Forbidal. Forbidal is really important for this deck, I feel. I think you don't have to run it, but if you're really worried about not seeing Astraios Dragon, Forbidal is great because Forbidal is just your 5th copy of Astraios Dragon. Forbidal calls up to 2 grade 3s from your deck, or you can add grade 4s to your hand. We don't have grade 4s, Valkyrion is 5, so we can only call a 3, and it's just going to be your 5th copy of Astraios Dragon. And finally, we're on Purple OT as the overtrigger of choice. This overtrigger allows you to retrieve a card from your damage zone, which is useful, but what we're really using it for is to call a card from our hand. If you check the purple overtrigger during the battle phase, you are allowed to call a card from your hand to the board as stand. We are going to be calling another Valkyrion to back row center, and then we're going to keep hitting face. That is kind of the main gist of this one. And if you do that, Valkyrion gets to get his drive skill again. It's the only way to get 2 Valkyrion attacks, since Valkyrion cannot be stood by other means. This is the sample list with a few more generic pieces. We're on the same dual clan that Jet was on just now, the one that I showed you. Because you can dig for grade 3s, which Astraeus Dragon is one of them. The Nebula Knight's Order can call Valkyrion or Astraeus Dragon from the deck. Sargon will dig, and Coco is just a pretty good card. These are, I think, very useful generics to consider. These I consider are all the ones that will dig through your deck. Sargon, Dissection Angel, Coco, Rear Limb. These are all ways that you can dig through your deck so you can find the pieces you really need. River Limb lets you pick up cards from your drop zone, which is really useful. Dissection Angel gives you an outlet for that soul you might have access of, and Coco can A, fuel your soul, and B, stack your deck for triggers, which is pretty useful. Coco is also a really big shield. I also on pretty few Coco because I always find that when you have too many and you play too many onto the board, you put a card from your hand and then you check top 2, adding 1 to your hand. You don't feel like you get a lot out of that. You kind of just go kind of even. So yeah, she's fine though. I think I just might have a bit of a bias against her, but if you can afford her, she's good. These are also some useful generics here. Nebula Knights helps you dig, the Order I mean. The 2 roommates over here, they also help you to dig through your deck and find a grade 3. I like Twin Cast in the deck as well. I think you desperately need a lot of guard. And if you Soul Blast out the Twin Cast after Soul Charging it from Valkyrion's drive check, you get 15k shield. And Biscotti, because you don't have too amazing of an energy sink aside from Phosphorus, this can help you dig through your deck and get you more guard. This is the ideal board state you want to achieve. I know it's a bit blurry because I've really magnified it, but this is what you want to have by turn 3. On turn 3, with 3 gauges, this is going to be your board state. Your front row will gain 5,000 power. Here, you can have Valkyrion swing 70k, and this is just a PG check, or they don't guard it at all. You check 1, Astraeus Dragon gains 2,000 power, and this puts you at 33,000 one column, 28,000 the other, assuming that your opponent is grade 3, and your Vanguard himself is 18k. Then at the end of the turn, Sargon will get you 1 card, and Astraea will bounce herself to the hand. You want to have this board state basically every turn. You want to recall another Astraeus Dragon as well after it moves the soul to draw you 1, so that you can have 5 on the next turn, and then Valkyrion multi-drive, and you can just imagine that the power in front is 10 bigger. That's all this deck is. This deck is just a little bit bigger on turn 4. Unlike the Jet one, there's not a lot to talk about because the strides make the board states a little bit different, but for this one, every game should look a bit like this. So let's talk about the pros of the deck. At 70,000 power, quintuple drive, that's really good. Valkyrion is an insane piece on the board. And honestly, even if Valkyrion only gets twin or triple drive, it's also very good. You can combine it with things like dropping a Shinemon or Uranus to the drop zone, and after that using River Limb to get it back to your hand. That's useful. Because of the way Shinemon's deck works in its Soul Blast 2 and a lot of Keter Sanctuary's card pool, you should be able to quite easily rebuild boards against retire decks, bind decks. That should be easy to find. And on the next turn, it's pretty easy to get your second Valkyrion into rotation. And finally, I've already mentioned this, but Keter's card pool is very good. It makes digging easy and gathering cards to guard very easy as well. And the cons. This deck really needs Astraeus Dragon on turn 3, or you lose. Again, I'm on Forbidal for both of the lists I just showed you because the Kai starter deck came with it and it's quite cheap as a result, but you really need Astraeus badly or your deck is just not going to function very well. 2. The deck has very little oomph outside of Valkyrion. You may have already seen it, but the columns are quite tiny aside from him. This is compared to similar decks like Barocrea or even Serif when she has the big 50k rear guard, who are all drive checking decks with, I guess, similar big hits. Compared to that, those decks seem a little bit bigger. Phosphorus is what, a 15k beater max, unless you like have Uranus and UP, right? Then it's what, 38,000 with a boost. That's nothing amazing, it's fine, but it leaves a bit to be desired sometimes. You're also a deck that really needs to drive check well. I mean, you probably will because of how Valkyrion works, but if you don't, you don't really get to do much. And even if you do check well on Valkyrion, you better really end the game because let's say you check 3 triggers on Valkyrion, your opponent guards through it no problem because the sides are innately quite small. You don't get to keep the triggers in your hand, they have to go to the soul. So you may find yourself in positions where you check very well, but you just don't have the guard next turn if Shinemon, the Vanguard, checks pretty badly. And finally, deck out. This deck digs a lot, this deck drives a lot, and as a result, you just might run out of deck before your opponent can die. Both of these decks have that problem. I think this deck is okay overall. I don't think it's anything crazy meta relevant, but I think if you are into Valkyrion's hype moments and aura quintuple drive, 70,000 power, that is where you want to play. This is one of the coolest decks in the game, honestly. I really love how they've kind of adapted the force marker thing to gauges, even though it's not, as hype as having your Vanguard stack a bunch of power. This is a bit more appropriate for Standard's power level right now. I just don't think it's particularly strong. I think it's okay, but I don't think it's gonna win you a lot of awards if you play this. But don't let that stop you. If you think the deck is fun, go ahead. Overall, these icon decks are fine. They do a pretty good job at recreating the fantasy both decks have. From Gear Chronicle's time manipulation to the big power stacking of Uranus in the form of its gauges and Valkyrion. In terms of meta relevance, I think these decks leave a bit to be desired. Between the two of these, I think Chronojet's a little bit better, and I'm sure you can gamble your way to a Valkyrion win, but that just feels a little bit inconsistent. The builds I provided, they're not, perfect. They're not going to answer all the questions you have about these decks, but I think they are a pretty good skeleton / starting point for you to get started on your journey building these decks. If you had to build one of these two, and you really want to win, I think Chronojet is more likely to win games. But other than that, just pick the one you like more. I think both are really cool. When I did some of my testing with these decks, I thought they were quite fun. Honestly, if you play Uranus and you slam Valkyrion down and you scream Zodiac Blazer, that shit is so fun. So I think these are really interesting attempts by Bushiroad to make nostalgia pandering a little bit more interesting. I wouldn't say they are fully successes, if in the sense that I think a success happens when the deck can see some competitive viability so that, people are encouraged to play it more and more in tournaments. But I do think flavor-wise, I think they do a really good job. I think at the very least, they make you really feel not just like the units there, but like the characters from the show, and I think that's a pretty important part of these icon decks. The fantasy isn't just I want to be the unit, it's now I want to be the guy from the show. And that's something that I think Vanguard does pretty well. Okay, let me know what you're picking up from this new set. I think this set is cool. For me personally, I'm picking up Nirvana, I don't need these guys, I need Nirvana Bhagavan. But what it's worth, tell me what you guys think of these decks, how you guys have built the decks in your own time, and if you're excited for them and what kind of icons you hope to see in the future. Okay, that's it from me. Bye-bye. Thank you to my Ko-Fi supporters Big Ben, Lang Long, and Milk. Thanks for contributing to the Scraggy Fund.